serious, Redditors who have had a near-death experience, what happened? As a teenager I was skateboarding down the stairs near a road. I had been doing a few different tricks. But on my last try I did my signature nightmare flip, which I've landed 100 times. Somehow this time I FK'd up and fell on my ass. My board went into the street and got annihilated by a box truck instantly. Had I landed it, I would have been killed. It wasn't the kind of thing where I saw my life flash before my eyes or anything. But I just sat there in shock as the guy stopped and started screaming at me. My friends started yelling back. Blah blah blah. Everything was like muted and I just stared into the street like what the FCK just happened? Double quote. I overdosed when I was about 16. It just felt like sleep. The one thing I'd recommend. Don't do that cause paramedics will cause you as much pain as they can to keep you awake. And some of the things people overdose on, if they survive, cause them to suffer for the rest of their lives. I'm thinking about paracetamol in particular. I overdosed at 19 on ibuprofen and zolpidem. I took just about the whole bottle of ibuprofen and somehow at 26. My liver is okay. I've had a lot of blood tests and chronic inflammatory issues, unrelated, but liver function is always good. I pee a lot though, so I wonder if I'm having kidney issues from it now. I feel really lucky that my stupidity didn't cause permanent issues. A friend and I were jumped by 4 grown men and accused of selling drugs. Totally untrue. Unfortunately this was on the top floor of a 5-story building. My friend was punched but escaped. I was cornered. 4 grown men kicked me all over the body and head before eventually telling me to get on my feet as I was to be thrown over the balcony. No way was I getting up, but literally just as I was dragged to my feet the police showed up. I was told to follow the 4 men down the stairs and away, but then they changed their mind and told me to go in front of them. As soon as I was in front I ran as fast as I could to the police, who had gone into the shop on the ground floor presumably to find whoever had called them, most likely alerted by my screams. It FK'd me up for a long time, and even now 22 years later I am still uncomfortable in situations with groups of people who I don't know and who are drinking. Mom had a seizure while driving and I was in the passenger seat. Couldn't reach the brakes, so tried to take the wheel and do the best I could. Drove into a guardrail just before a pretty steep cliff and went under it. But it stopped us before we went over. Holy shit, the exact same thing happened to me when I was a kid. Mum was driving me to school. And right before you reach our school there's a sharp 20% decline. Followed by a 20% incline. Like a U in the road. We flew down the hill and I remember thinking, holy shit. Why is mum driving so fast today? Looked across and her eyes were slammed wide open and she had her face pressed almost up against the windshield in concentration. I knew she had epilepsy, so I recognized it was a seizure. Just about shit my pants and grabbed the wheel. She slowed down to an absolute crawl and people behind us were honking. I just kept calling her name and eventually steered us onto the curb where she put the handbrake on and got out the car. It was weird. Like she was fighting the seizure like hell because she knew her kids were in the car. I didn't even know you could do that. I have a heart condition that causes me to faint and then consequently results in me having seizures. When I was 7 this happened in a swimming pool and I drowned. The memories aren't clear, but I will never forget the blackness and the sensation of falling. I was terrified of heights and falling sensations prior to this. It was sort of like in the movies when the character is just hanging about in the black abyss, but instead of floating it's just endless falling. I don't really believe in hell or the afterlife now. But at the time I was absolutely convinced that it was my own personal damnation. I still don't like to think about it too much. I was going fast on a highway when the car in front of me slammed on the brakes out of nowhere. I tried stopping but quickly determined at my current speed that what would end up stopping me was the car in front, so I swerved to the open left lane. I ended up overcorrecting in a very top heavy car and proceeded to flip my car multiple times through each lane until I ended up on the right shoulder with my car precariously balanced over the edge of an overpass I was on, miraculously not hitting anyone else. I managed to walk away with some minor scratches and the EMTs were baffled as to how I was not more damaged after rolling my car a few times. My car was totaled and I ended up stranded in a city I knew no one in. Luckily an acquaintance just happened to be driving behind me and saw the accident and gave me a ride home. It was both a bad day, car totaled, and a great day, no one died. It's not a very interesting story. But over the summer I went down an incline while skateboarding with a helmet. Lost control of my board. And hit the back of my head pretty hard. My whole body seized and my arms went up in a fencing position for a couple seconds. And I truly thought I was going to die. However, it ended and I got up. With blood everywhere. I immediately tell my friends to drive me to a hospital. And there was a huge gash on my head. I never thought life could be that fragile. And when my mom came to pick me up, I cried the whole way to my house. I almost died. And it was f***ing terrifying. I guess I'm a little better now. However, I can't really describe the experience without tensing up and feeling sick to my stomach. I guess I have PTSD from it. And I'm very paranoid when it comes to my head. I don't skate anymore. And I'm not that much of a risk taker anymore either. Wear your helmets, guys. That paralyzing feeling you can get by hitting your head is horrific. Cycling down a blissfully quiet country lane in the UK in the height of summer. Enjoying myself. An 18-wheeler comes out of nowhere from behind. Didn't even hear it. It sailed past me and the rear left tail light pylon clipped me. Hooked around my backpack and ripped me out of the saddle and sent me flying into a ditch. My view was straight ahead. Then ground. Then sky. Then ground. Then sky. Then grass. Then sky. Then ditch. Then black. I remember coming round a few minutes later. And I distinctly remember it being quiet and sunny still. As if nothing had happened. Driver didn't stop. Didn't see him or get a license number or anything. And this was about 12 years ago, so I don't remember the fine details. When I was flying through the air, I had the weirdest thought about the lorry that it was blue and that was a nice color for a lorry. Why would you think about that when your life is literally flying before your eyes? I was working live sound at a festival for a small town. While we were setting up the speaker and light structure, we noticed the wire cable that hoists and holds the speakers was starting to fray, so we were going to bring the speakers down to replace the cable. As we are bringing the speakers down, I heard the cable start to creak. Then, like in a movie, time slowed down. I heard the cable snap. Some lady screamed. And about 500 pounds of speakers fell from about 10 feet in the air and landed about 6 inches away from me. Luckily no one got hurt, but if I was positioned any more to the right I probably would have died or lost a limb. When I was 8 I was at a driving range hitting golf balls with my older brother who was 19 and quite good. It was just me and him there since my dad was playing in a small tournament on the course and we were waiting for him to get done. I hit a crappy shot that went like 15 feet in front of me to the right, and I decided it was far enough away from my brother so he wouldn't hit me, and like I said, he was a good player. The last thing I remember was bending down to pick up my ball. Apparently my brother had a rare bad swing and his ball hit me very hard in the side of my head. I was knocked out immediately. My body went into the fencing response as a result of the trauma, and my brother thought I was having a seizure. He assumed the worst, thinking it hit my temple, and he really thought he had killed me. He stayed as calm as he could and called 911 and also tried to get a hold of our dad. I woke up to my dad and brother next to me, and my brother started bawling his eyes out saying how sorry he was, and then I started crying too. I did have a concussion and eating for the next 2 weeks hurt my jaw because of the bruise. I learned my lesson, and my older brother is currently an amateur on the PGA Tour, so I guess it had a happy ending. Was riding downhill on a bike with a road at the bottom. Found out brake wasn't working and didn't do anything about it. Thankfully there was a fence at the particular segment where I was separating me from the road. So I crashed in that instead of riding full speed into the road with cars. Worse than mine. My brakes still worked but wouldn't have stopped me in time, so I had to bail at 35 miles per hour. Skipped like a stone across the pavement, tearing up the backs of my hands and the palms. And breaking my elbow with the force of the impact. All things considered, I could have slammed into a tree or been hit by a car, so honestly it wasn't that bad. I had been playing hide and seek at night when I was 12 and my mom had already told me to go inside several times. On the last game before we wrapped up I ran for the base and did not see one of those Mexican cast iron tripods. My house has a car entrance. And that's where I would go with huge excitement to hug my dad when he came from work. Keep in mind I was about 5 or 6 years old, so my dad comes and I run to the car but he can't see me. I was very short, so he can't push the brakes. I swear the only thing that saved me as I went under the car was a big vase that stopped the wheels. I remember my dad crying and I don't want to imagine what would happen if not for that vase. I was on a drop tower ride. And as it dropped my safety bar came loose. The belt stopped it from going all the way up. But even that was long and I'm a pretty small dude. I nearly slid out the side as it shot back up. The warning light came on slow and the operator didn't notice. Heart was pounding because I could feel myself slip more as the speed would pick up. I nearly fell out completely if I wasn't being held on to. Copy and paste from a previous post of mine. I posted this for a similar question in the past. In the 5th grade, I was at a close friend's pool party. We all decided to play chicken in the pool. Of course. I've always been the tall guy in the group so I'm usually on the bottom. Well, we lost a round and I fell flat on my stomach on the bottom of the pool. All fine and dandy until I realized that somehow a few of the kids' legs were knotted and bound with my partner's arm. That was wrapped around my neck. The worst part was that everyone in the pool kept pushing my friend down, the birthday boy, to dunk him and mess around. So my friend couldn't tell them I was under him and no one knew I was at the bottom. I attempted to push them all up to get out of the water about 5 times, being pushed and slipping back to my stomach on each attempt. The final time I had no more energy and felt calm laying at the bottom of the pool. My surroundings faded and I passed out. I woke up at some point in the lawn throwing up water. Terrifying for me to this day. TLDR, almost drowned. And basically felt my life force draining as I blacked out. 0/10 wouldn't do it again. I did go-kart with a scarf on. And it caught on the wheel. It was attached in a sort of sliding knot that meant instant hanged man. It eventually ripped itself from my throat and when I found the scarf later, it was intact. I still don't know how I survived that. It should not have been possible. It really should not have been possible. I should be dead. As someone who works at a go-karting place, you should never have been allowed to ride with a scarf or anything hanging on. We always tell people to tuck in their hair and tie their shoelaces for their safety. Alone and had food poisoning that caused a gastrointestinal infection. Roommate found me dehydrated and delirious. I took in 6 fluid bags at the hospital. Scary stuff. My wife had that happen to her in college. She was so dehydrated she was hallucinating. She was so frustrated because she could see people walk by the bathroom while she was puking crapping and she asked for water. She was screaming, "Why won't you help me?" I had the swine flu the year it was a huge problem. I was in middle school at the time. And my single mother couldn't afford to take off work so I stayed home alone with such a high fever I was hallucinating off and on for 2 days. It was hell. It happened 2 years ago when I tried hanging myself. As I was choking, my body started frantically writhing like a worm on a hook. The rope couldn't hold me any longer and I fell down. I laid for a few minutes on the cold, filthy ground. And it was quite the experience. I felt disconnected. Like cracked glass that was about to shatter and spread in all directions. And yet, it didn't. While stuck in the observer consciousness, you start feeling everything. Every muscle in your body. Your weakened limbs. The cold air on your skin. You start acknowledging what living truly is. And what it means to living beings like us. It was a very transformative experience. Driving home from school for Thanksgiving break just over a week ago, I was caught in a flash flood going 80 down the highway. I was in the right lane of a 4-lane, 2 each way, road. A gust of wind hit me and I flew off the left side into a ditch. And spun around like a carnival ride. If the ditch wasn't quite as deep I would have ended up in oncoming traffic. Closest to dying I've ever come. Entirely off topic. But assuming you've got the coverage, would your insurance consider it act of God, or would they consider it your fault? I'm actually not sure. I'm still a student, so I'm on my parents' insurance plan. Lucky the damage wasn't too bad and I didn't have to involve insurance and find out. Me and some friends used to go to the beach to play volleyball some evenings. One night, me and one of the guys walked over to a gas station across the road in between games to get a snack or whatever. A minute or two later everyone pulled up in a car. When we went to go back, the chick driving, who no one really knew that well, was like, hey, just hop on the trunk and hold on. It's just right back across the road. So me and my friend are like, okay cool, and hop on. Well, this girl had the brilliant idea once we were in the parking lot to take a turn going about 40 miles per hour, thinking it would be funny. Me and my friend both get flung off the back of the car. Luckily, he landed in grass but still ended up breaking his arm. Me on the other hand, I was thrown onto the pavement where I cracked my head open, broke a collarbone, ankle, and 3 ribs. I went unconscious. And from what I was told, one of my friends literally sat there holding the back of my head together while they waited on medics to arrive. I had to get life-flighted to a hospital about an hour away. I had 2 or 3 seizures on the way. When I came around in the hospital later that evening, the doctor told me had my friend not been holding my head together, or had the medics shown up like 5 minutes after they did, I probably wouldn't have made it. But all is well now. Actually, the dumbest girl left after she saw how bad what she had done was, and actually ended up getting arrested and charged with something or another. The last I heard she was in jail, but that was like 2-3 years ago. Forgot what age I was. Young dumb kid age, maybe 7 or 8. Friends and I were swimming in our pool and I decided it was a good idea to go to the deep end and swim from the bottom upwards behind the ladder, in the space between the ladder and the side of the pool. I knowingly did this and got stuck once I got the top half of my body past the first steps. So there I am, basically stuck and drowning 4 feet underwater. My other friend who had goggles on saw me and somehow pulled the bottom half of the ladder far enough away from the wall for me to swim out from under it. The angle I was at, I had no leverage on it myself since my arms were stuck to my side. So yeah, that was terrifying. Now anytime someone jokingly jumps on me, or if I have the slightest feeling of being held down underwater, I completely go into sheer panic. If my friend didn't see me, or they just left me underneath, I would have 100% drowned. I was using a urinal in a restaurant, and the next moment I was on a backboard surrounded by first responders. I had fainted in the restroom and smashed my head on the tile floor, causing a brain bleed. 1/3 of the people who do this die on impact. Sonny Bono, another 1/3 die within 24 hours. Natasha Richardson, I was in the fortunate 1/3 that survive, but still have some lifelong issues from it. I caught pneumonia when I was 5 years old and spent 6 weeks in the hospital. My memories are fuzzy about anything when I was in kindergarten, but I do remember vividly that one day, my class took a field trip to come see me in my hospital bed and deliver get well cards to me. I didn't learn until much later that they did that in spite of the fact that the doctors thought I was going to die. In fact, I didn't realize at the time that they thought I might die at all. I only learned that from my mom about 3-4 years ago. I am 42 now. I'm not sure if it's really a near-death experience, but when I was around 9 or 10, our class was going into another building which was on the opposite side of the street. So we walk there and I'm a little late, so I have to do it on my own. Pretty normal, right? As soon as it switched green for me, I started to walk, and then there was this car that definitely didn't see the red light for him and basically touched me with his car. First of all, not knowing how to react, I just stood there in complete shock. The driver was around 80 and was put into the hospital because of a heart attack. Later survived. My teacher grabbed me and dragged me into the classroom with all my classmates just staring at me while some started to bully me and tell me it's my fault that the driver got into the hospital. I just stayed in shock for the whole week and just couldn't do anything. TLDR, old driver messed up. His car touched me and I stayed in a shock for the whole week. Mine is tame compared to other people's. I was a kid climbing a 2 or 3 story tree. Not really that high up, but still to a point where a fall would do some damage. I ended up slipping and falling head first towards the ground. I remember feeling really calm and thinking, this is it, before blacking out. When I came to, I had somehow gotten my bent leg knee caught on one of the other branches. So I was scratched up and shaken, but beyond that, totally fine. Can't say I've ever had an experience like that since, most likely because I've actively tried to avoid it. I was wake surfing on a lake with my family. Jet skiers have a tendency to follow wake boats because they make nice waves to jump. I fell off the board, but the jet skiers didn't see me fall. They kept going forward and one of them came a few feet from running me over at full speed, taking my head off basically. I distinctly remember seeing the jet ski a few feet in front of me driving straight at my head and thinking not good. 2 years ago, I was being a dumb little idiot and speeding around 180 km/h. Midnight when it was raining. Mad at my girlfriend or something. I've learned to control myself since. I had 3 of my friends in the car with me and I risked their lives too. The most shitty thing I've done in my life. Not proud. The highway took a twist and I lost traction. Starts spinning sideways from one of the end highway to the other. Luckily there were no cars and I somehow managed to gain back traction and drove home. I saw my life flash before my eyes. Holy shit. 3 experiences. One of them funny. 1. I fell into a swimming pool with nobody around and I didn't know how to swim and woke up with my cousin giving me CPR. 2. One of my old friends got me to lick a generator as a kid. I woke up on the ground with him crying and his dad over me. 3. My dad told me not to eat a bunch of Skittles at once because I might choke. Well, guess what I fucking did? Then I sat in my room choking because I didn't want dad to take my Skittles away until I realized I was gonna die and my vision started going black. Then I ran to dad and he did the Heimlich thing and then guess what? He took my goddamn Skittles away. I was so pissed off as a kid. When I was younger I was at a show with my dad and had a seizure during a ride. If he didn't go on it with me I'd be dead. Crazy part is that was the only ride he went on that day. I kept asking him and finally he said sure. 2 off-duty paramedics were at the show too and helped. All I remember is lining up, sitting on my seat and my dad asking me if I was okay. After that I remember waking up in the ambulance vehicle for about 15 seconds and everything being brown and blurry, then in my hospital bed. Bro and I were hiking up a mountain. Nothing serious. We did it once a month every now and then. It was before the winter apocalypse hit the south. We always take a different trail because you could see more on the way up. What we didn't know was that the trail had ice on it and there is a drop very close to the trail. We both slipped to a sliding close to the drop. We held onto small craters for a good 5 minutes. We were scared shitless and began breaking the ice so we can get up without falling again. It's crazy how long time can feel when your adrenaline goes insane. I was 8 years old and at my friend's swimming party. I was quite an excellent swimmer for that age. So my parents and friends never expected anything to happen. You know those massive inflatable rings? Me and 5 other friends were sitting on top of one. And one by one dropping into the center of the donut. Swimming under the ring and surfacing on the outside. An idiot boy pushed me into the center. I decided to just swim under the ring and shove him in too. Thing is, I only had about half a breath of air. One of the boys tried to reach down and grabbed my ankle as I was swimming down. I just kicked out and got free. I surfaced on the other side of the donut. But there was one of those massive floats in the way. I kept swimming along under it. It turned out, the donut had drifted close to a wall. The float was pushed right up between the wall and the donut. So I couldn't get to the surface. I was really panicking. But I managed to grab the edge of the float and pull myself backwards and up to the surface. The lifeguards hadn't seen me, as I'd been below the ring and float. If I hadn't been a strong swimmer, I might not have made it to the surface and I wouldn't have been noticed for a minute or 2. In high school I was training for our state swimming competition. I was the only one who qualified for it that season, but my friends still swam with me to stay in shape and motivate me. I told them I could swim 75 yards underwater. I knew I could because I did it in the past. This time I wanted more of a challenge, so I began pushing off the wall instead of diving in. First 2 lengths of the pool were easy. As I turned underwater for the last 25 yards I knew I was in trouble, but I would not give up. After all, I told them I could do it. I started seeing splotches, but I touched the final wall and everyone was cheering me on. At least that's what happened in my head. In reality I had passed out, glided into the wall, hitting my head against it and sank to the bottom. I was a bit of a show off back then, so my friends thought I swam to the bottom to sit down there, proving I could hold my breath longer. Finally, after 30 seconds or so, someone dove down to get me. They said it took me another 30 seconds to come back to while they contemplated calling 911. I like telling this story because as one of the top high school swimmers I almost drowned. I witnessed my mom have a near-death experience. She went out with friends to a restaurant. She came home a little early because she wasn't feeling super good. She went to bed and almost immediately after she laid down, she felt really dizzy and it was hard for her to breathe. She was barely breathing and not responsive. So my dad started CPR while I called 911. I didn't know what was going on, so my mom's friend took over the call and I left. She became responsive, but the paramedics took her to hospital to figure out why her heart almost stopped. Tests found high amounts of ecstasy in her system. Somehow someone at Red Robin's laced her food with enough to almost kill her. I think I've written about this in a similar thread before. I suffer from idiopathic anaphylaxis, which basically means severe allergic reaction to an unknown trigger. I've had a few attacks and they get me pretty close to being gone for good because they starve me of oxygen. The result is the absolute loss of color and severe weakness. The worst is going into shock, where I felt like everything was empty. It was just me and the sound of my slowing heartbeat. And I had no idea how fast time was passing or anything. Thankfully this only happened the first time, 11 years ago, and I've been better at fighting it off every time. Sadly still no luck finding out what I'm allergic to, though I might be on track to figure something out. The best description of this experience is just fear. It's scary. There's a lot of helplessness. Everything starts to fade away. It's like I'm a light bulb that's slowly extinguishing. It's like all the energy spread through my body is receding and is ready to be put out.